I've just disembarked the Norwegian Spirit from a 14-day cruise that started in Taiwan and ended in Singapore. With only 2 sea days, this cruise was packed full of ports and activities, and I'm going to share with you the good, the bad, and the in-between from this incredible itinerary that took place over Christmas and New Year's in 2024. The Spirit is Norwegian's oldest and smallest ship, built back in the late 1990s, but recently underwent a $100 million refurbishment, and the ship looks absolutely amazing from top to bottom. I embarked the Norwegian Spirit on December 22nd, 2024 in Keelung, Taiwan. During this cruise, we visited Taiwan, Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, and 5 ports in the Philippines, ending the cruise in Singapore. The itinerary was fantastic, but the onboard experience exceeded my expectations in many ways. Let me also talk about the itinerary because what we got wasn't exactly what was advertised. I'm going to share the original itinerary at the time I booked this cruise, and then I'll talk about the changes that were made after final payment. Originally, we were meant to have 3 ports in Taiwan, including embarkation day, 5 ports in the Philippines, 1 stop in Malaysia, 1 in Brunei, 2 in Vietnam, and finally ending with disembarkation day arriving into Singapore. The changes that were made to the itinerary affected a Taiwan port, a Philippines port, a Vietnam port, and the Singapore arrival. Hualien, Taiwan was removed, understandably because of a devastating earthquake that occurred near the area back in April of last year. Salamag, Philippines was replaced with Curaçao, which ended up being the worst port day of the cruise, and we completely missed our excursion. And it was also Christmas Day, but I'll speak on that a little bit later. Next, our port stop in Nha Trang, Vietnam was removed entirely without a reason provided, and instead of replacing it with another Vietnam port, we ended up arriving in Singapore a day early and stayed overnight before disembarking the next day. This would have been fine, as I love the time that we spent in Singapore and I'm glad we had an extra day there, but Norwegian ended up closing down some of the facilities that day, so we couldn't use them all, and it felt like we lost part of the amenities we were entitled to on our last full day of the cruise. I'll speak more on this later as well. Once we boarded the ship, we were amazed by how beautiful the decorations were. This was a Christmas and New Year's cruise, and they went all out. The ship was beautiful. There was garland and Christmas trees everywhere, and gingerbread villages, real gingerbread, real food, real icing, built all around the ship. Every single restaurant had their own gingerbread house creation. And then in the atrium of the ship, the main central area where everyone gathered, there was a huge Asian-themed gingerbread display that had all kinds of recognizable landmarks from all of the different ports that we would be visiting on this cruise. Norwegian really does a very good job of going all out for decorations over the holidays, and this was no exception. For New Year's Eve, the ship also decorated. There were balloons in the atrium and an ice sculpture out on the pool deck that turned from 2024 into 2025 on midnight, the night of New Year's Eve. It was an incredible celebration, and I cannot recommend enough doing a holiday-themed cruise with Norwegian. The ship itself is beautiful. The venues have been beautifully updated and decorated. One of my favorite areas on the entire ship was the Spinnaker Observation Lounge. At the very top, very front of the ship, it was a 180-degree view outside the ship, all around you, and it was incredible. There was really comfortable furniture in there, views all around the windows. You could go right up to the windows and look out. This was an amazing place to be for sail away. Of course, you can't see much in the evening when it's dark outside, but there was live music in there every night. There were games and events and trivias and all kinds of things happening in the Spinnaker Lounge, and a big bar right in the back, so you had everything you need right at your fingertips. I even went in there a couple of mornings and saw that they had a little bit of a breakfast spread. They had coffee and tea and pastries, so if you didn't want to go all the way down to the buffet, or you didn't want to go sit at the main dining room, you could just pop in there, get a quick bite to eat, and then head on your way. Some of my other favorite venues on the ship were Magnum's Champagne Bar, which overlooked the atrium and had live music every single night of the week, all night long. It was an amazing venue. The bartenders were incredible there. In addition to Magnum's, there's of course the atrium, which is a beautiful open space that had lots of seating and also had lots of activities. They would have presentations and demonstrations. There's a big screen there that shared information about the ports that we were visiting. So it's right next to guest services, right next to the shore excursion desk, and just one of the most central places on the ship. Nearby the atrium was Henry's Pub, a really, really fun location that I did not spend enough time in, but they had trivia there almost every night of the cruise, and I really enjoyed spending time in there the last couple of nights, and the bartenders and the servers in there were fantastic. But of course, I would say that about every single crew member on the ship. I didn't encounter anyone who was unhappy, unkind, unfriendly. They were all absolutely fantastic. The social club was another great spot, sort of hidden away past the casino in the very back. And this is where they would hold things like karaoke and dance parties at night. And they also had these solo gatherings in the social club. It's a big open spot with a nice bar and a dance floor. So when it's late night and they have the overflow from parties that might have started on the pool deck and moved down below, the social club was definitely the place to be. The casino was also beautiful, and one thing that I absolutely loved about this ship compared to a lot of Norwegian's other older small ships in the same class and the same style is that this was a non-smoking casino. There was a smoking section that was enclosed behind glass, separate from the main casino area, and I did not smell any smoke the entire time I was on the ship. So great job, Norwegian, at putting a separate smoking section for people who do want to smoke, but does not bother any of the rest of us who don't. And finally, the pool deck. So there was the main pool deck right in the middle of the ship up top. They had live music there every single day, every afternoon, but they also had a pool at the very back of the ship in an area called Spice H2O. And this was an adults only area and a place I spent a lot of my time. It is a beautiful space with stadium style seating with tables. So if you wanted to eat your breakfast out there, it's just behind the buffet, but there's also lounge chairs with a beautiful view off the aft of the ship, 2 hot tubs and a bar and a beautiful big pool. It was definitely a spot I spent a lot of time in during this cruise, but I will say that there were issues on this cruise with passengers who brought their children into this area during the adults only hours and did not listen to the crew when the crew asked them to take their kids to the other pool that is supervised, has a lifeguard. There were just some families on this cruise that did not want to listen, and so would argue with the crew who asked them to take their kids to the kids pool. So that was a little bit frustrating. There were definitely some moments where they had to bring security down and extra officers to help enforce the rules of the adults only area. So that was a little bit of a frustrating moment, but that is not on the crew and it's not on Norwegian. It's not on the cruise line. It is on the parents who did not want to follow the rules. Unfortunately, there were some times where I ended up just leaving the area because you don't want to be in an adults only area where there are screaming kids. It's just not what it's meant for. So unfortunately, I felt that did impact my afternoons a couple of times, but again, that is the parents' fault and not the fault of Norwegian. They did their best to enforce the rules. Because I hold a US passport, I needed a visa to visit Vietnam. That's the only country I needed a visa for. Of course, I recommend to please do your own research always ahead of any cruise for the countries you'll be visiting to see what documentation you might need. Norwegian has a place on their website where you can find all of this information relevant for your itinerary. But for Vietnam, you can actually opt to have the ship procure a visa on your behalf once on board, but at a much higher cost than if you were to do it yourself. I chose to apply for the visa myself ahead of time for $25 US. I printed this form out and I gave it to Norwegian on boarding day during the check-in process where my passport was verified and I received my key card. The drive time for me from Taipei City to Keelung was around 45 minutes and cost about $26 US for a taxi. I always recommend to have your e-docs either printed or readily available on your phone so that the check-in agent can scan the barcode and see your information. Now, with regards to my passport, the ship did collect my passport after we left Taiwan. So we spent 2 days in Taiwan, and at the end of those 2 days, they collected our passports and kept them until the sea day before we arrived in Singapore. And the reason that the cruise does this oftentimes is to make it much easier on the passengers. Each port often requires scanning, reviewing, and stamping every passport of every passenger on the ship. There were 2,000 passengers on the Norwegian Spirit for this cruise. Imagine the lines that we would have had to stand in and the wait times if we had to go and get our passport checked and stamped by customs officials at every single port we arrived to. It would have held things up for every single port and delayed disembarkation and embarkation, so it just made things easier on us passengers as well as the crew on board the ship. One of the really cool things about having handed over my passport, though, is that I got stamps for every single country that we went to. A lot of times, countries nowadays don't actually stamp your passport when you visit. In Europe, I don't often get my passport stamped at all, definitely not in the Caribbean. So it was a cool experience to get a passport stamp for all of these countries, especially Brunei, one of the smallest countries in Southeast Asia, and a country I never really thought I'd visit, but now my passport has a stamp from there. In addition to needing a visa for Vietnam, every country we visited also required us to fill out an e-arrival form online ahead of arriving at port. Norwegian actually gave us access to each of these websites through their app. Even if you didn't have an unlimited Wi-Fi plan and you didn't have minutes to use, Norwegian gave us all access to these websites for free. You just go on the app, go to the free websites list, and you could access each of them so that you could fill out this form easily ahead of time. Now, when it comes to entertainment and shows and live music, I thought Norwegian did a great job with the live music that was offered around the ship. There were 5 different acts, 2 solo acts, 2 duos, and one of the big house band that performed all over the ship, and they were incredible. The house band, amazing. The lead singer, she has an incredible voice. She could sing anything, absolutely anything. They were all so talented. I think every single one of the band members could sing and did sing at various times. They played on the pool deck. They played for New Year's Eve. They played for all kinds of different events and things going on around the ship. And I also thought both of the duos were really good too. My favorite was the Dial to duo. It was 2 men. They were both absolutely amazing. They both sang. One played piano, just so personable and charismatic and incredibly talented. Loved them. And then there were 2 solo artists, a guitarist and then a pianist, and they were both great. Not my favorite of the 5 different live music options available, but all talented. There was no shortage. Every single night there was live music playing at least 3 or 4 places around the ship. So there you could always go find live music somewhere, and I loved that. I love that about Norwegian. As far as the production shows go, there were only 2 main production shows that happened during the course of the cruise, and both of them happened near the end. So there's Elements and Blazing Boots. Those 2 are actually common production shows that Norwegian has on many of their ships. I love both of them. I've seen both of them probably 6 or 7 times each. I did see Blazing Boots again. I did skip Elements because I've seen it so many times, but that's it. The other shows were tributes. So they had a Stevie Wonder tribute. They had a Whitney Houston tribute. They had a trumpet player who was fantastic with a band. And then there were some other shows, like there was a Christmas themed production show that did include folks from the cast of the main shows. And there was Ocean Music Fest, which I skipped both of those. To be honest, the location of my cabin on this cruise was at the aft on deck 9, and I could actually hear the shows being performed in my cabin. So in the evening when I was getting ready for dinner and to go out, I could actually hear a lot of what was being performed in the theater. So they usually had shows at 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. and I would typically be still getting ready around 7 p.m. so I could hear the shows from my cabin. So I didn't feel like I had to go and watch them because I had actually already heard them. That is part of the reason why I didn't go to all of the shows on this cruise. I like going to them. I enjoy watching them, but I usually don't want to sit and waste 45 minutes to an hour of my time in the evenings in the theater. And I also typically am either doing something else when the shows are going on. I'm still at dinner, I'm about to go to dinner, and I just can't plan my evenings well around the times of the shows. But for me, it is not one of the main reasons I cruise, so I can take it or leave it. I know Norwegian is cutting back on their shows, but it's not a make or break it for me, so I'll leave it at that. With regards to other activities and entertainment, there was trivia almost every night in Henry's Pub. There was bingo, there were dance classes that they would hold up in Spinnaker Lounge where you could learn the dance to a particular song. There were all kinds of things that went on around the ship. Of course, karaoke almost every single night in the social club, so there's never a shortage of activities or things to do in the evenings and the afternoons. Because this was a very port-heavy itinerary, I do feel like there were less things going on around the ship. That didn't bother me. I was exhausted after all the excursions because I did a lot of full day excursions on this trip. And so missing some of the activities or not having a whole lot of activities to choose from really didn't bother me. That's probably the case for most people on this cruise just because of how busy it was. So let's talk about food. Norwegian is known for having pretty good food on their ships. Up until recently, I only heard people raving about how good Norwegian's food was. The last couple of cruises I have taken on Norwegian, I have felt the food quality and availability has gone down a bit. My number one complaint with Norwegian, and this has been the same complaint that I've had with them since I very first started cruising, there are not enough vegetarian options on board. There are not enough items on the menu that you can customize. I was raised vegetarian, so it is not a matter of preference for me. It is literally, I have never eaten certain meats and I have no desire to start now. Vegetarianism is not an uncommon thing these days. To me, it doesn't feel that difficult to make menu items customizable. I struggle at times with Norwegian on finding things on their menu that I can eat and that I want to eat. It is, in my opinion, not enough to only provide one vegetarian option on the menu. My one request to Norwegian, please add more vegetarian options or at least make your menu items customizable. And that is my only gripe with Norwegian's food menu in the main dining rooms. On the Norwegian Spirit, during my cruise, there were 3 complimentary dining rooms. There is Windows, which is the very back of the ship, which has a beautiful view out of the aft. High windows, high ceilings, absolutely beautiful venue. It was my favorite place to eat dinner in the evenings. And then there was Taste, which is another main dining room. It did also have window seating, but it was a smaller venue with lower ceilings, very intimate and quiet. And the staff in both restaurants were absolutely amazing, so accommodating, so friendly. And I got lucky to have a window seat many times. And then also on my cruise was Silk, which was the Asian themed restaurant. During my cruise, it was complimentary, but actually right after that, starting in January in 2025, the Asian restaurant on Norwegian's ships is no longer complimentary. So you do have to use either a dining package credit, a specialty dining credit for it, or you pay a cover charge. And it's different depending on the specialty dining restaurants. On the Norwegian Spirit, there is teppanyaki, which is the hibachi style restaurant, which I did go to twice. There's Onda by Scarpetta, which is the Italian restaurant, which I went to once. And there is Cagney's, the steakhouse, and Le Bistro, which is the French restaurant. Because I am mostly vegetarian, I cannot really eat anything at Cagney's besides a couple of the sides, which to me is not worth using a dining package on. Le Bistro only has one vegetarian option on the menu, and seeing how many times I've been on Norwegian and I've eaten at that restaurant, I can no longer eat that one menu item. So I will not go back to Le Bistro until the menu changes, but those are the options for specialty dining. I thought the food was amazing at the Asian restaurant, so delicious, especially for complimentary food. It's a bummer that they are making that now a cover charge. The Local, one of my favorite dining venues on board. The Local is almost open 24 hours. They are open for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then late night snacks as well, I think until like 2 or 3 a.m. I ate most of my meals at the Local, I would say. Ate breakfast there several times. I had lunch there almost every day when I wasn't out on an excursion in a port. Didn't really eat dinner there because the main dining room is a better option with more menu options compared to the Local, but it is a great place to just go grab a snack. They have delicious appetizers. They've got, it's kind of pub food, and I thought it was always delicious. I definitely recommend the Local as a good sit down and get a quick bite that's reliable and consistently good and has a variety of menu options. Very good, very tasty, very consistent. The buffet is the final venue for food that I will talk about. I ate most of my breakfasts at the buffet, and on this ship, the buffet is in a really good location. It's near the back of the ship, and there's lots of outdoor seating if you go all the way back out where you overlook Spice H2O, the adults only area. There's lots of outdoor tables and seating. It's covered so that you're able to still eat outside even if there's inclement weather. You have a great view around you of the port or the ocean or wherever you happen to be sailing. They had a beverage station outside. They had a bar out there as well. So I thought the buffet was great. The only thing I'll say about the buffet is because I'm a frequent Norwegian cruiser, I have seen the offerings at the buffet decline. There's certain things that used to be available that are no longer available anymore. And I know that this is because they're cutting back on food costs. This is something Norwegian has announced several times over the last few years. As a shareholder, I understand that this is necessary to recoup the costs that they lost during the time they weren't sailing from the pandemic. But it is noticeable that the quality of the ingredients that they're using is lower than it used to be, and the availability of certain items is just not there. They don't have hash browns anymore. They don't have the salmon available for bagels in the morning at the buffet. There's no salsa anymore, which is, it might be weird, but I have to put salsa on my omelets. They don't have that available anymore. There's just certain things that are noticeably missing, as well as the quality of the food. I just have noticed the quality decline from where it used to be. I'm hoping that Norwegian will change this, and that as time goes on, they will start to bring some things back and start to introduce better quality food for the main dining rooms and for the buffet. But for right now, it does seem like the quality is down a little bit. I'm saying that because I know that Norwegian is doing that. They have said that they are doing that on their main Norwegian Cruise Line product. On their luxury products, I don't think that they're making these same cuts. This is not a Norwegian specific change. Many cruise lines across the board are dropping the quality of their food and reducing the availability of items. I understand the reasons that they're doing it, but cruising is very popular right now. Cruises are selling out. People want to cruise. If you've never cruised before and you go on a cruise and you see everything that there is on offer, you wouldn't know any different. But for someone who's a frequent cruiser who has seen the offerings that used to be available, and the prices continue to go up for cruises, but with less offerings and less availability, it is a harder pill to swallow. Do I like it? No. I'll be honest, I don't like it, but I understand it. So next, let's talk about the Wi-Fi. So the Norwegian Spirit does have Starlink. It was installed recently on the ship, and one thing that changed when Starlink was installed is that you no longer can message other people with an iPhone. So prior to installing Starlink as the Wi-Fi service provider, you could get around having to buy an internet package, because if you had an iPhone, you'd be able to iMessage for free without connecting and paying for a Wi-Fi package. Now that they have migrated to Starlink, that no longer works. You do now have to pay for a Wi-Fi package in order to communicate with other people on the ship by any method. Norwegian used to offer an in-app messaging service for $10 per person, where you could actually message within the Norwegian app to other cruisers. With the migration to their new app and the subsequent sunsetting of their old app, that messaging feature between cruisers is no longer available. I do not know if they're planning to bring it back, but the only way to communicate with other people on the ship is to purchase a Wi-Fi package, and it is not cheap. It is very expensive to purchase the Wi-Fi, and I do wish that Norwegian would drop the price a little bit, especially because the reliability of the Wi-Fi was inconsistent. There were certain ports, specifically Brunei comes to mind, where we actually didn't have available working Wi-Fi at all while we were docked in Brunei. But we also had no cell service. So one of the countries that is not on the list for my unlimited international roaming plan was Brunei. So I had no cell service and there was no Wi-Fi while in port. So just something to keep in mind. Not every single port is going to have working Wi-Fi on the ship, even if you've purchased a Wi-Fi plan. So something to note. This might be a controversial opinion for some, but I did feel like the crew were much happier on this cruise compared to some that I've been on recently in the Caribbean or in Europe, where the passengers are just less happy and less willing to take things as they come and not complain. But I did think on this cruise there was much less complaining. Things did not always go right. Things did not go perfectly. You kind of have to pick your battles. Most things are not worth the battle. They're not worth the complaints. And if it's out of your control, then there's nothing you can do about it. And complaining to the crew who can't control it either just isn't the best way to approach it. Just my opinion. The one area of this cruise where I do feel like Norwegian fell short on the onboard experience is with shore excursions and onboard communication. The organization was definitely lacking on this cruise. There were some pretty poorly planned and poorly organized excursion experiences. To use one example, Curacao was a disaster. What I found with Norwegian is they typically want you to meet for your excursion 30 to 45 minutes before the actual start time. What this means is that you end up getting the majority of the passengers on the ship all crowded inside one location. And then when they call the excursion numbers, everyone herds towards the exit and rushes towards the exit. And then I witnessed multiple instances of pushing and shoving and fighting. That could have easily been avoided by better organization of meeting times and excursion locations. If I had any recommendation to Norwegian to improve things from this cruise, it would be the ShoreX with meeting times and excursion locations and not overcrowding the theater and not having people come an hour ahead of their excursion meeting time. Also, ship communication. There was one instance where we were supposed to dock at 10 a.m. And usually the docking time meant the disembarkation time within a few minutes. What Norwegian did though is they changed the docking time on our schedule to 9 a.m. We docked at 9. It took 1 full hour plus some to get clearance from customs and border control before we could actually get off the ship. So there were people lining up at 9 a.m. to disembark when it would be another hour and 15 minutes before they actually cleared the ship. There was no speaker communication. People didn't know what was going on or what the wait was from. They should have just communicated this or changed the communication in the Freestyle Daily, and that would have solved that problem. On the topic of the Freestyle Daily, I don't know if it was this ship, but there is a massive issue with the Freestyle Daily printing every day. Every single day, the Freestyle Daily was printed wrong. The descriptions would be wrong for things. They would have the title of the movie and then the description, but the description wouldn't match the movie title. We weren't able to know like what was actually going on around the ship. So the only way that you could tell what was actually happening was to use the app. If the app worked, which again, it was not super reliable. There were moments where it wasn't functioning. It was confusing. So it was hard to know what to take as truth. Freestyle Daily printout was almost wrong every single day of the cruise. And then finally on the ports. So I actually have no complaints about really any of the ports except one. Well, two. The first was Curacao, Philippines. Now, I'm gonna give Norwegian a pass on this one because I do not think that it was entirely their fault what happened in Curacao, but I do recommend going back to watch that video in my series to see exactly what happened. This was Norwegian Spirit's first visit to Curacao, first ever. So when it's the first time you're visiting a port, naturally there are going to be things that go wrong. Learning and growing pains, and that is what happened in Curacao on our cruise. It was a tender port, which makes things worse. When you have to take a small boat to shore from the ship, tender operations are always challenging, no matter what port you're in. The weather plays a big part. We ended up wasting hours sitting on a tender, getting to shore, realizing that we were gonna have to wait another hour or two to arrive. We ended up just going back to the ship, skipping our excursion. They did give us a refund for that excursion. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong in that port, so I don't want to hold it against them because I know that those things happen. Fortunately, it was only one of 5 ports that we got to experience in the Philippines. If it had been our only port in the Philippines, I definitely would have been a little bit more upset. But just given the circumstances, I'm gonna give Norwegian a pass for this one. The second port that I would say was challenging was Ho Chi Minh City. And it's because we were not docked anywhere near Ho Chi Minh City. So we were actually at Phu Mai, which is at least an hour and a half drive away from Ho Chi Minh City. So your best option there is you have to do an excursion that includes transportation to the city. And they did have options you could do, explore the city on your own. They had a guided tour, which is what I did, or they had a couple of other tour options around the area. It's not the only place where you're docking far away from the city. Fortunately, we didn't have many of those on this cruise, but that one was a challenge just because of how long the drive time was, and it was the longest day of the cruise away from the ship. It was the longest port day. I think we were out for over 10 hours that day. It was a long day. If I were to do it again, I would probably stay on the ship, but it was our only port in Vietnam. So we were supposed to have one day in Nha Trang, and then one day, the disembarkation day, would be in Singapore. Instead, they canceled Nha Trang and they gave us 2 days in Singapore, including an overnight. But the problem with that is our second to last day of the cruise, when we were in Singapore, they closed the pools and the hot tubs. They drained them and they closed them so that we couldn't use them. And I believe they did that because the ship was going to go into a short 4-day dry dock right after our cruise. But I was really upset that they took away the pools and the hot tub on our very last full day of the cruise. I was a little upset and really bummed that we didn't have the pool to enjoy on our second to last day, because it was a full day there. It was a very hot day. We got back to the ship early enough in the afternoon to try and enjoy the pool, only to find out that the pools had been drained. So on that, I'm gonna have to dock Norwegian a little bit because I was very bummed. And that concludes my full review of the Norwegian Spirit 14-day cruise from Taiwan to Singapore in Southeast Asia. I had an incredible time on this cruise. Do not let any of the things that I said that were critical about my experience on this cruise lead you to believe that I didn't love every single minute. I absolutely did. It was amazing. It was a dream trip. It was a bucket list trip for me. It checked every single box for what I'm looking for in an amazing cruise. I recommend it, 100% recommend it. Would I do it again? Absolutely. I would love to repeat this itinerary or a similar itinerary, or one that goes to different ports. And in fact, I loved this ship so much that I will be going on the Norwegian Spirit again later this year in 2025. So stay tuned for another incredible itinerary in a different part of the world. I can't wait to show you all of that. I filmed a video every single port day on this cruise, 13 videos in total, including extra days that I spent in Singapore. So if you haven't seen them, go back and watch them in order to get the full experience of this itinerary along with me. If you have watched all the videos in this series and come along with me on this incredible journey, thank you so much for all of your support. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you watching my videos. This is a second job for me, and I love what I do with YouTube. I love making these videos. I never saw myself as a vlogger, and here I am making videos about my experiences traveling solo around the world, and it's because of you that I can continue to do this. So again, I appreciate all of your support. Please leave me a comment and let me know what you thought about my experience on this cruise. Did I leave anything out? Do you have any questions for me? Please ask them. I would love to answer, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Thank you. Goodbye. Happy cruising. I will see you next time.